For today's video, we are going to be doing a rhino, and I'm going to show you a really cool technique that you can create using cling film, and it makes this really nice scratchy texture, which is good for rhinos or if you want to do a whale. And I've even painted a geode using this effect. It's so much fun. So let's get started. To make this rhino, you're going to need a pencil, paints. I'm using watercolors, but you could also use watered down acrylics, a piece of cling film, as well as pencil crayons or pastels to add our final details. Right, our first step is to draw our rhino. What we're first going to do is plan out where his body is going to be. So use these 2/3 of your page here and draw a nice big rectangle kind of in the middle, because we want to have space to still draw his legs. Okay, and it's quite a big rectangle. Rhinos are really solid, big animals. I'm drawing this lightly because obviously we don't want a big fat rectangle in our page at the end. This is just to help us draw it. Now we're going to add an oval shape for his head. So you're going to start from the left-hand side of your rectangle and let your oval come up a little bit. This is because the rhino's shoulder blade sticks out, so we're using it to help us draw that, as well as his head. And I know I've said an oval shape, but maybe a sausage is a bit of a better explanation. We need to end it off as quite a square shape. We're going to be drawing a white rhino, so white rhinos have flat mouths because they eat grass. If we were drawing a black rhino, they would have a pointed mouth because they eat leaves off trees. Okay, so we've got our basic outline of our rhino now. I'm just going to shorten mine a little bit. Now I'm going to go over it and smooth it off, make it look more like a rhino. So using this oval that's at the top, I'm going to draw a nice curve and drop down onto my rectangle, and then draw a little bit of a curve at the end of its back. Its tail just comes right down. His ears are just below the curve, so draw them roundabout in line with where your rectangle was. And if you think of a leaf shape, that would be pretty good for a rhino's ear, and they kind of stick up straight. They have a really good sense of hearing, rhinos, because they can't see very well, so their ears are always pinned up straight listening. So what we've done now is added his horn, and I've made it as high as his back. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how high you should make it, and it's kind of at the end of his nose. And then he has a second horn. Well, a white rhino has a second horn, so does a black rhino, but some of the others don't. The rhinos that you found in Southeast Asia. Right, then we're going to bring it down and do his mouth here. So their mouth is right at the bottom of their jaw. We're just going to draw a line going up to round about where your small horn is. And then we can start adding bottom lip. After you've got into this spot here, you can start curving out and giving him a nice jaw to make kind of a C shape. Right, what I'm going to do now is erase these two lines that I don't need anymore. I found when you're drawing, it's easier to erase lines as you go. Otherwise it can get really confusing at the end. Just got lots of lines all over the place and you don't know which ones are the ones you want and which ones you don't want. We're going to be adding his legs now, so they have quite short stubby legs. And from his chin, I'm just going to draw a curve almost down to the bottom of our rectangle. And then it's going to start going in and just come out a little bit at the bottom for his foot. Okay, and then again it goes in, and round about when you get to the bottom of your rectangle, it should go out in a V shape. So that would be almost like his elbow. If we're talking about these are his two arms, that would be like his elbow there. Right, and then we're going to just give him a little bit of a belly. And then the leg that's on the other side, we'll just see a little bit of it. And you can end that leg a little higher than the front leg, so that it looks like it's off in the distance. If you make them the same length, it kind of looks like a little bit out, like that one at the back is too long. So you should make the one at the back a bit shorter. For his back leg, we're going to start with a nice big C shape. Start round about as high as you got with his front leg, Do a nice big C coming down. And then try and end this leg off at round about the same spot you ended the front leg off with. Okay, and then we're going to take it up there to the tail. And then we're just going to see a small sliver of the back leg. Right, now we've got our basic outline of the rhino. Oh, I just want to quickly add his eye. Sorry, his eye is just below the small horn. They've got quite small little eyes, so you can just mark off a little oval shape. And then a little crease over that. And we can add a nostril there in the front under the big horn. So again, just erasing these little lines that I don't need anymore. And our next step is to paint it. Now, before we put the paint on, we need to be prepared because this next step, it needs to happen like really quickly. You can't stop in the middle because if the paint dries, then the technique is not going to work. So although rhinos are usually grey, particularly the African rhinos, we're going to make ours a purple and a blue, just because that does show up as grey in some artistic pictures and it just looks a bit more colourful and fun. So what you need to do is if you've got watercolours, mix a bit of blue and a bit of purple. Or if you are using acrylic paints, you just need to add quite a bit of water to them to make them nice and runny and thin. So you don't want a thick paint, it needs to be a really runny, watery paint. I've mixed my two paints already. I didn't have a purple, so I just mixed red and blue together and it makes purple. So that's a nice trick if you don't have purple paint. Once you've got your paint mixed up, and make sure you mix quite a bit. He's a big rhino and we don't want to run out of paint while we're painting him. You also need to tear off a piece of cling film that's big enough to cover your rhino. So just check that you have a piece that's big enough, and you're going to want to scrunch it up a little bit. So don't make it just big enough. I've got about 5 centimeters on each side of my rhino, so I've got lots of space to crunch it up. And the more you crunch it up, the more wrinkly and leathery he's going to look at the end. Okay, so once you have your cling film ready and your paint ready, you can get started with the actual painting of your rhino. So what we're going to do is just paint over where the rhino's body is. Try and be careful to stay in the lines. Try your best to stay in the lines, but don't worry if you aren't, because we'll be able to neaten up later with our pencil crayons or pastels. What I'm doing is just doing patches of the purple and the blue, and what I'm kind of trying to think about when I'm doing it is where would he have darker shades and where would he be lighter. So his front leg would definitely be lighter, this back one would be a bit darker. So I did the darker one purple because purple is a slightly darker color. If you have a darker shade of blue, then use your blue in the darker spots. But the two legs that are closest to us, I've made them the lighter blue. Now blue and purple, they mix together really well because they are right next to each other on the color wheel. So you shouldn't have a problem blending the two colors together. If it bleeds like that, don't worry, that will also add to the effect at the end. If you find that your paint is starting to dry before you can spread it all, just add a little bit of water to it. And if you are finding, like me, you're getting these little splodges or like flecks in your paint, that is from brushing the page too many times. You've pulled up pieces of the page, and it means that you need to stop trying to spread your paint so much. Just keep loading your brush with more and more paint. Okay. If you're battling to blend two colors, just put a bit of water over it, and it helps them blend together. Okay, you want to do this as quickly as possible because the paint still needs to be wet when you put the cling film on. So don't take so long that your paint dries, because the more the paint is dried, the less effect you'll see. Okay, I'm just adding all my paint onto the page. The more paint you add, the better the effect's going to look at the end. So if you still have paint, add it. Right, now while mine is still wet, I'm going to put my cling film over it. Now you want to make sure that you scrunch it up as much as you can. So you can already see how it's going to dry. The more you scrunch it up, the more wrinkly and crackly your rhino's skin will look. Right, once you're happy that you've got enough wrinkles and crackles on it, you need to leave it to dry completely. So if you try and pull it off before it's dried, the paint's just going to run flat and then it's not going to dry in these lovely crackly effects. Okay, so you need to make sure that it's really dry. Leave it for at least an hour before you do the next stage. Right, it is the moment of truth and we're going to pull our cling film off our paper. If you start pulling it and you see that there aren't creases and crinkles just yet and the paint is still very wet, just put it back down really quickly and pretend you didn't do it. And that man is looking pretty wrinkly and crackled. Right, what we're going to do now is just neaten him up and add a few details to him. So you could use pastels for this or pencil crayons, it's up to you. I'm going to get my pastels out and use them. Right, we're going to stick to our blue themed rhino. So I'm going to get a nice dark colored blue pastel, or you can use your pencil crayon. And I'm going to start neatening the edges. So if you can still see your pencil lines from earlier, you can just go over them. And what we've got to think about is where it's going to be darker. The underside of his belly is going to be quite dark. So what I'm going to do is just start off by getting those lines from his legs, and in any spots where you went out the lines, just extend it and cover that so there's a nice neat finish. Okay, so across his belly here we're going to do a little bit of dark shading. Now what I've done is press really hard on the edges to get a nice clean line, and then just not pressing as hard here. I'm just colouring lightly over these spots just to get a little bit of a shadow. You could even rub it with your finger to get it really nice and smooth, but don't rub too much because the paper has gone through a lot today, so if you rub too hard you're going to tear it like I have done there. Okay, I'm going to outline this back foot. Let's go over his tail. He's got a little bit of a clump of hair at the end of his tail, so you can add a few extra lines on there if you want. Where his shoulder is here, there'll also be a little bit of dark shading on that side of his back. So I'm just doing some light colouring on the inside of my dark line. Right, I'm turning my page so that I'm not leaning on places where I've already drawn with pastel. Just go over the ear nicely. You might find you just have to colour in your ear with pastels depending on how your picture turned out. Okay, you shade in his eye and draw a nice crease over there. You could do a little bit of dark shading underneath the horns and along the bottom of his jawbone here. Just a little bit of light colouring over his back. You can just see how outlining it makes it pop out a little bit, just a bit brighter and stand out nicely. Right, and then we need to colour in his horns. Now the rhino's horns, I'm using a beigey kind of a colour, and I'm going to use a little bit of grey and a little bit of brown. So this colour is going to be the main colour of my horns, but I also want to add a little bit of dark shading, so the bottom of the horn might be a bit darker, and I'm going to do 1 or 2 lines of this brown, and then I'll do a bit of grey outline on the other side, and then I'm going with this peachy colour over it. You could also add a little bit of white or yellow to it. And there's our crackly, wrinkly rhino. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if this is the first time you're watching one of my videos, why not subscribe? We put up fun, creative ideas every week.